From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Do enhanced interrogation techniques like waterboarding work? Are they justified? We'll hear from a man who was involved in the development of the CIA's Enhanced Interrogation Techniques program and who personally interrogated high-value detainees at CIA black sites. And then a story of love and war in the Iraq War, and that's all today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. First up, we've got Dr. James Mitchell. He's got a Ph.D. in clinical psychology. He served in the U.S. Air Force for 22 years. And from 2002 through January of 2009, Dr. Mitchell involved with the CIA's Enhanced Interrogation Program. His co-author, Bill Harlow, spent 7 years as top spokesman for the CIA and 4 years at the White House handling national security media matters for two presidents. The new book that's just out, Enhanced Interrogation, Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. Welcome, Jim. How are you this morning?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
Great. It's our honor. I want to start off just briefly with the first answer, if you can, as an overview. Then we'll dig deeper. Does enhanced interrogation work, and is it morally justifiable?
Well, let me answer the second one first, right? This is something that I struggled with when they first asked me if I would do this. The first thing I wanted to do is make sure that they were legal. And then the second thing I wanted to do was make sure that it made sense from a moral perspective. And what I basically came to the conclusion of is that for some reason in our society, there's this belief that these terrorists who are trying to kill thousands of people somehow have the right, since they're not citizens and they've voluntarily taken up arms to try to kill us, that they somehow have the right to protect that information, and that right of theirs to protect that information outweighs my moral obligation to try to save American lives. And I thought about that long and hard, and finally decided that for me, that wasn't true. You know, the temporary discomfort of some terrorist who has voluntarily decided that he wants to kill us does not outweigh my moral obligation to save American lives.
All righty. I've looked at this always kind of from two sides, and your book really sort of expresses this. On the one hand, I saw the CIA was taking these big risks, bold, going out and doing this, and I felt all along that at some point the politicians would end up hanging them out to dry, and that seemed to happen. The other side was taking Senator McCain, for instance, who I think is kind of nutty on some things, but I really respect as a tortured POW what he went through. He's been adamantly against any form of torture, and I've heard General Mattis, who will be the DOD secretary under Trump, has said he doesn't think they work, and just give me beer and some cigarettes and I'll make more headway.
Well, I would like to address both of those before we get lost. The first is General Mattis. I think what General Mattis has to do is ask himself, what would he do under those circumstances? Would he give up information that would get Americans killed or disrupt some military plan that he had for a Michelob and a pack of Winstons? No, he wouldn't, and KSM didn't either, and they actually tried that for several days. The second point I would make about what Senator McCain said was Senator McCain said all rough interrogation techniques, which he called torture, need to be illegal. But then when someone asked him, well, what do you do in a ticking time bomb scenario? He said, I expect the CIA interrogators to do what's right, to do whatever is required and to get that information to stop the attack. And at their trials, at their criminal trials, we'll take that into consideration. The problem with that sort of thinking is that, first off, it's been my experience that when you stop a catastrophic attack like we did, that second wave of attacks that Hambali had planned for the west coast of the United States, it's not long before people begin to think that, well, maybe those attacks really weren't going to happen after all, because they didn't happen, right? The second thing is those people who argue that we should be tried for things that our Senate and our political leaders expect us to do want to live under the protection that the men and women who are willing to sacrifice their lives provide, but they don't want to have their backs just so that they can put some salve on their own moral conscience.
Do you feel you guys were hung out to dry? And was that inevitable?
We not only were hung out to dry, we're still being hung out to dry.
Yeah.
You know, Senator Feinstein accused us of torture. Senator Feinstein leaked my name on deep background to, well, not she didn't, her staffers did, to the reporters. And now I'm being sued by the ACLU on behalf of 3 enemy combatants.
Wow.
Let me tell you who they are.
Jeez.
One of them was a member of Al-Qaeda in East Africa and participated in the bombing of 2 U.S. embassies in 1998, one in Nairobi and one in Dar es Salaam, killing 244 people, including 12 Americans. That man is suing me. The other one was a Libyan who's running a terrorist training camp, training jihadis to kill Americans when they were trying to catch Al-Qaeda. He was caught, transferred to Libya, where he got a life sentence. And then when the Libyan government collapsed, he was released. He is suing me. And then the third one is a man who died 6 days after we just happened to be passing through where he was at and tried to get medical care for him. His nephew was suing us. He was a member of the Taliban who had participated in the killing of the Northern Alliance leader.
You talk about him in the book, I think. Right?
I do talk about him. His name is Gul Rahman. His nephew was suing us, but we had nothing whatsoever to do with the chain of circumstances that led to his death.
I hope the government's picking up the tab on the legal.
They're picking up the tab, but they're slow-rolling the release of documents, and they're refusing to let us depose people who could clear us.
It's terrible. I mean, you guys did this when there was the heightened almost paranoia of this attack, and then now 10 years later, nobody remembers, and you're hung out to dry. Tell us, I'd like to hear you on the techniques of which waterboarding is the one everybody knows about, the techniques that you guys used. And I assume, and I know you went through waterboarding. Describe what it's like.
It sucks. You know, the way the Department of Justice approved the use of waterboarding was you put a person on a reclined bench, and then you put a cloth over their face, and you can pour water for 20 to 40 seconds, raise the cloth, give them 3 full breaths, lower the cloth, and pour water again for 20 to 40 seconds for up to 20 minutes. Bruce and I decided after the first minute and a half or so with Abu Zubaydah that we weren't going to do that we were going to pour water an average of about 8 seconds. So we would only do 2 20-second pours and 1 40-second pour in that 20-minute time period that was authorized. And the rest of the time, we had lots of pours that were 2 or 3 seconds and some that were 8 to 12 seconds, but on average about 8 seconds. Because we just didn't want to use that much water. We had experienced it ourselves, and we didn't think it was necessary.
Some of the other things you did, walling, nudity, go through them.
Here's the notion behind EITs. What you do is you put the person in a difficult situation, and you allow them to escape that situation by answering questions. And so the situation has to be believable. Walling itself is not painful. I've been walled thousands of times. You know, there's a specially constructed wall that's made out of 1/4-inch plywood, full sheets of 1/4-inch plywood with no struts behind them, no studs behind them. It has a padding on the front of it, and it bounces just like a wrestling mat, just like those wrestling matches you would see on professional wrestling where somebody comes off the top rope and falls all the way down to the bottom. So there's lots of noise and lots of bounce, but not much pain. You use a special collar to prevent their neck from being injured or their head from hitting the wall. You bounce just the shoulders. It actually disorients you because it causes the water in your inner ear to slosh around, and it's disorienting.
Interesting.
But not painful.
And is facial slap painful at all?
It stings, but it isn't painful. And we actually didn't use that to try to beat information out of a person. The facial slaps were used primarily when the person disrespected you. If they spit on you, or in one case, one of the detainees tried to kick me in the nuts. You know, we would slap under those circumstances.
So Jim, this obviously puts these guys in a rather desperate mode. How do you know they're not lying versus they're telling the truth? You picked that up over time from your background?
Well, that's a piece of it, but the real issue is that we never thought that they were going to provide us with actionable intelligence while the actual EITs were being applied. The way this thing was put together. It was put together to work essentially the same way that a dental phobia would work, right? The time that the person is most desperate to get out of going to the dentist's office is just as he's driving into the parking lot and reaching for the doorknob of the dentist's office. And so what we would do at the end of an interrogation session is we would ask them a bridging question, and we would tell them, if you tell us what we want to know, the next time we talk to you, this won't happen. So I might ask you, where did you get your necktie? The next time somebody talks to you, they're going to ask you where you got that necktie. And if you tell them, then there's not going to be any rough stuff. And then the next time there's an interrogation, the person starts with, in a very friendly way, where did you get that necktie? And if the person answers, you don't use them. Use EITs. And so what we found is that after about 72 hours, they begin to answer the questions without the use of EITs.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Biz Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station closest to you. Listen over the Internet, access our podcast of shows. We'll go inside an interrogation room next with Dr. Mitchell. And we're back with Dr. James Mitchell, expert in enhanced interrogation techniques used in the War on Terror. Let me ask you first, Jim, I know you can't go into detail where these places are, but you did this at black sites. How are they different? Are they in countries that are a little bit more blind towards torture? Is there any reason that they're linked to where the black sites are? What can you tell us about them?
Well, I really can't tell you very much about them. I mean, those black sites and the location of those black sites are still classified, and so I don't want to get sideways with the very people who are slow rolling us on the stuff we need for defense by revealing some secret.
All right. Well, tell us then. We'll go inside the room of a high-value detainee be interrogated. What the room looks like, and let's use Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was KSM, as he's called. He was the mastermind behind 9/11. Tell us what you did with him.
Well, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the interesting thing about all of these detainees is people have a tendency to think that they had enhanced interrogation the entire time that they were in CIA custody. Mm-hmm. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in CIA custody 1,285 days, of which he only received 3 weeks of EITs. That means there was another 170 weeks that he was working with us, more or less, to prevent the next attack. In fact, a lot of the information that stopped Hambali's second wave of catastrophic attacks came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed after EITs. So the interrogation with him went like this. He was held for a few days in Pakistan where they tried tea and respectful conversation, and he wasn't cooperative. Then he went to Cobalt, where personally I think he was mistreated. And then he came to us, and when he came to us, we did a neutral assessment, which means that I just walk in there and ask him, tell him we want information to stop operations inside the United States. He is arrogant and hostile and tells me, soon you will know, and then I give him a bridging question and essentially say to him, in every man's life, there are times when the decisions that they make forever changes what happens to them, and I want to make sure that you know that that's the case for you right now. If you answer these questions, there'll be no rough stuff. Nothing's going to happen, but we're not going to let you do another attack like 9/11. And so I give him a bridging question. He goes and he sits for a little while, and then he comes out, and he's against a walling wall. In fact, I think we had that one built in his cell. He's against the walling wall, and the other interrogator comes in, takes the hood off him, asks him the bridging question, and when he tells him to pound sand, when KSM refuses to answer the question and says something flippant, the other interrogator, who was Dr. Jessen, walls him 2 or 3 times and then asks him, is what you just said to me going to help me stop attacks inside the United States? And KSM said no. And so then he walled him a couple more times and said, I didn't think so. Now, let's start over. And he asked him the question again. And it proceeds kind of like that for a while. And then eventually, when it's clear that he's not going to cooperate, we escalate to the water board. The water board wasn't particularly effective on him. He's, even though it was judged by the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency people as being absolutely convincing, KSM wasn't affected by it very much. He could somehow pass the water through his sinuses and out his mouth, and it just didn't. He could count down. But what worked with him was walling and sleep deprivation. And once that worked with him, he became immensely cooperative for everything except the location of UBL.
And there's confusion about this number, which you can clarify. You hear things like, well, they waterboarded him 83 times, but that was actually the pores versus the actual times, right?
You're referring to Abu Zubaydah. They say
Yes.
Abu Zubaydah was waterboarded 83 times, but actually it was 83 pores. And one of the side effects of reducing the length of time that you pour, when we reduced it to an average of 8 seconds, that gave Abu Zubaydah a lot more opportunities to breathe. Because imagine what it would be like to have somebody pouring water on you for 40 seconds over and over and over again. It would be horrifying. But the other thing that it did is it increased the total number of pours, not the amount of water that was used, but the total number of times you tipped the water bottle. Mm-hmm. And that's why you get these large numbers. Like it was 183, I think it said, for KSM. The physicians actually kept track of the number of pours, and we had another person who kept track of the seconds.
KSM actually describes how he murdered the Wall Street Journal's Danny Pearl.
Yes, he did. We were... one of the things that was unique about the way that Bruce and I, Dr. Jessen and I, did interrogations is after the interrogation was over, we would go back in for what we called a fireside chat, which is actually just a different non-direct interrogation. And we had a WMD expert pressing KSM about whether or not Al-Qaeda had nuclear material, because we knew that UBL had met with the Pakistanis who were passing out nuclear technology, and the Pakistanis had said, well, the difficult part is getting fissionable material, and Osama bin Laden had said, what if I've already got it? And so the CIA is desperately trying to stop this second wave of attacks and find that material. And we're pressing him pretty hard, and after it's over, we go in and we ask him, we say, well, it looks like you were hiding something when you were talking. You seem nervous about, and then he just describes cutting the head off of Daniel Pearl and dismembering him and stacking him in a hole.
Unbelievable. Tell us, because obviously you went inside the mind, these guys, what goes on inside their mind? They genuinely believe what they're doing?
Well, they believe that the only way that they can avoid the torment of the grave and get into paradise is actually to kill, convert, or enslave everyone on the planet so that they're all under a Muslim caliphate and subject to Sharia law. And they don't intend to stop till they get that. KSM was one of those people who thought that the way to do that was to destroy America, because then they would be free to move forward. But he told me in 2004 that he thought these catastrophic attacks weren't really the most effective way of doing it, that the most practical way of winning that long war was to immigrate to the United States, wrap yourself in the protection of the United States' Bill of Rights and civil liberties, feed yourself off of our welfare system while you spread your jihadi message, and then when the time is right, rise up like these lone wolves are doing and attack the United States, because the target is not our military. They know they can't defeat our military. The target is the mind of the American public. And what he said was that if we do enough of these attacks, you will eventually begin to impose Sharia law on yourself. You'll change the way you dress. You won't talk about things that Muslims are offended by. You'll allow things like foot washing and taxi guys not to pick up people they don't like. And then we're going to impose Sharia law.
ISIS tweeted that they would like to cut your head off after your photos of you and your name was released. How did you deal, and your family, with those kind of threats?
Well, my father-in-law, who was a Marine during World War II, was blown up on day 5 of the battle for Iwo Jima by a Japanese mortar. He was in hospice at our house at the time, so we couldn't leave. There was no place that we could go. So what happened was our local sheriff's department sent, the FBI came, the sheriff's department SWAT team came, a bunch of retired special operators came, and we have lots of protection at my house, and so it would have been a mistake to come to my place. But so we just waited for them to come, and they didn't come. Thank goodness for them, because they better be wearing what they plan on wearing when they meet their virgins if they come around my place.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Biz Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station closest to you, listen over the internet. And we're back with Jim Mitchell. He's got a new book out called Enhanced Interrogation: Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. Tell us now what it's like to go through 5 investigations. You were accused of bamboozling the taxpayers out of $81 million, and for a long time you couldn't really even defend yourself because of non-disclosure agreements.
Yeah, I wasn't actually able to defend. I was the only person on the planet who wasn't able to suggest that I was part of that program until 2015, believe it or not. So people were just free to say anything they wanted to say. So there were a number of these investigations, starting with leaks that came out of the CIA IG office themselves. One of the senior people at the IG was leaking information to the New York Times. And
wow, that should be illegal, isn't it, for a CIA guy to do?
It was a gal, and yeah, it was illegal, but they decided to let her retire rather than prosecute her. And then, of course, because of those leaks and because of some of the discussions of some of the FBI guys that were originally involved, our names got into the press. And so we had a number of these things. You know, this issue about whether or not it was torture, I always thought had been answered because, you know, there were 5 different opinions that were issued by the Department of Justice in real time while these things were happening, including one opinion that waterboarding wasn't torture after I waterboarded an assistant attorney general. And a few days later, he opined that not only that it didn't violate U.S. law, it didn't violate the Constitution and didn't violate our treaty obligations. And then when Obama was elected, his Attorney General, Eric Holder, stacked the Justice Department with attorneys who had been defending the detainees and ordered an investigation into whether or not CIA interrogators had tortured the detainees, including me and Bruce. And after 3 years in front of a grand jury, they said there was no case to file.
One of the obviously the basic conclusion out of Senator Feinstein's Select Committee on Intelligence report was that they uncovered that no value came out of this EIT program. And your response?
You shouldn't take my response. You should take the CIA's response and the other members of that same committee. You know, the Republicans on that committee published a minority report in which they described 17 different instances where information from that program stopped attacks in the United States. The CIA said that information from that program captured terrorists who were still at large, provided information about the organization and structure of our enemies, stopped catastrophic attacks, and saved American lives.
The negative, or what can happen, you refer to it as abusive drift, where which didn't happen under your watch because you were so careful. But I guess al-Nashiri suffered this way. When you have abusive drift, meaning you go beyond the guidelines, is that enough to say we need to shut everything down?
Well, it's enough to say that you ought to investigate those people that are doing that. You know, it wasn't really my watch because it wasn't Jim Mitchell's program. I was actually functioning primarily as an interrogator. I didn't run anything, you know, in spite of what Feinstein's report says. I was deployed as an interrogator under the direction and control of the CIA senior person on that thing. And every one of these EITs were done when I was doing them with a physician and a psychologist and senior CIA people and experts in whatever the questioning was, like a WMD expert or a financial expert or whoever, any of whom could have stopped the interrogations that we were doing at any time for any reason. So what happened, though, is that they brought in a guy to be the head of RDG, of the Rendition, Detention, and Interrogation group, who had learned his interrogation techniques working with the anti-communist rebels in South America, and he was a horror show.
Now, your response to the charge you bamboozled taxpayers out of $81 million?
Well, what happened was in 2006, after they forced that guy that was abusing people to retire, 2005 actually, Bruce and I were looking to go do other things, and they said, "Well, we're gonna put a contract out to get personnel to do a number of things, and some of the contracts that weren't related to interrogation, they were going to move our contracts to another thing. And they said, but if you have a company, you can bid on it. So we thought it was going to be an open bid. We wrote a technical proposal, and in response to their statement of work, and we thought it was going to be an open bid. And at some point, they decided no, it was going to be sole source. So we had no control over that. But it was let under the same contracting laws and vetted under the same federal contracting laws that Senator Feinstein's multi-million-dollar contract with the federal government was let and vetted as well.
And I think it's important to say that you personally got a very small amount of that money. There's not $81 million sitting in a bank account somewhere.
Oh no, we at one point had they won't let me give you numbers, right? Mm-hmm. But depending on where in the slice after 2005 you're talking about, it was anywhere from 60 to around 100 people who were involved not just in interrogations and renditions and security. They were doing a variety of things. We were basically a personnel. We were a contract to provide personnel who would then work for the CIA under the control of the CIA.
So, does it leave you with a strong sense of bitterness that the folks in Congress who were saying get out and do anything you can to fix this, and the White House and the intelligence community, and now it's like, well, this wasn't of any value. Why were we doing it? Like the amnesia almost. Well,
the CIA actually said some pretty nice things about us in classified documents that have subsequently been released. Here's what I'm concerned about is, Donald Trump, who's the president-elect, of course, is talking about going back to waterboarding and worse and ratcheting things up. Well, he's got a new CIA director who's going to be interviewed by the SISI, and one of the senators on there is my Senator Rubio, right? I want to know whether or not he's going to throw the people under the bus like the current CIA director has. Because, like I said, they're slow-rolling the information that we could use to protect ourselves.
Now, obviously, the ultimate metric is, as a result of this program, are we safer? And that's within the context of the program being stopped in 2009 when President Obama came in. Are we less safe since he stopped it?
I think we're less safe. In fact, I think we're less safe than we were before 2001 when the 9/11 happened. And the reason for that really is that we've got this increase in these lone wolf attacks that's coming directly from this poor immigration policy. Look at what's happening in Europe. It's just horrific over there. And that's the trend that KSM was telling me about in 2005. He said that these lone wolf attacks are going to increase. Just get ready for it. And our problem with this thing is that not only do we have the lone wolf attacks that are increasing, we've still got Al-Qaeda and ISIS looking for the knockout punch for the United States. I mean, somebody gets up every day and tries to figure out how to build a nuclear bomb. We need to be finding that person and killing them.
Do enhanced interrogation techniques, would they work with this lone wolf thing, or is that's hard to get?
Well, the problem that you have, and I think it's a good problem. It's not a bad problem. Is that if the person's a U.S. citizen, then they deserve all of the rights of a U.S. citizen, right? But if they're not a U.S. citizen and they are actively engaged in trying to destroy us, and that's voluntary, because here's the thing that people don't realize about the use of EITs. The detainee can stop it any time he wants to by simply answering the question. And if he doesn't know the answer to that question, he can explain that he doesn't know the answer to that question and provide some other piece of information that's useful. So it isn't like you're just going to willy-nilly apply them until the person becomes so helpless they're unable to continue. So in my mind, you got to be careful. It's going to take an aggressive combination, I think, of standard law enforcement techniques and some sort of legal, let me emphasize, legal coercion. And let me tell you why. Right now, as it stands, as a result of Senator McCain's inclusion in the Defense Appropriations Act in 2015, my local mall cop can use interrogation techniques that the intelligence community can't. The intelligence community is restricted to just the Army Field Manual. And we know from practical experience that manual does not work on the most senior people who are committed to protecting secrets.
All right, we will have one final segment coming up with Dr. Mitchell, and we'll look overall at EITs. Stay with us. And we're back with Dr. James Mitchell, expert in enhanced interrogation techniques used in the War on Terror. I hope there's a light at the end of the tunnel for you. You don't have to go through this legal stuff for the rest of your life.
The ACLU has been stalking us since 2005. According to their own speeches that they've given at various places with like-minded attorneys, they went out looking for who they consider to be the most sympathetic terrorists that they could find. I just don't know that the guy that blew up the U.S. Embassy is the most sympathetic guy.
The thing that comes down all this stuff is that these guys have a 100-year time frame, and our attention span's very short here.
Abu Zubaydah told me I am just one mujahideen in a long line of mujahideens who reach back to the Prophet. And in Allah's timeline, you are already dead. Right. We already control the world. And so when I fall, another one's going to rise up. They take the long view, as you said, and it's more than 100 years. They take the long view, and we take the short view.
Do you think ISIS or Al-Qaeda will be successful detonating a WMD at some point?
I'm more concerned about ISIS using some of those. Everybody says that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but one of the things that happened is they buried a lot of their mustard gas and some of their other chemical weapons. ISIS has been digging them up.
Oh, really?
And they've been using them against the Kurdish forces that have been fighting them, and against some of the civilians. And if you Google ISIS use chemical weapons against U.S. troops, you'll see that there was a time when they thought they had done that to the U.S. troops, but they concluded after testing that they hadn't done it yet to them. So somewhere I read that ISIS had used chemical weapons against the people they were fighting, not us, but the people they were fighting, somewhere around 50 times.
Well, Saddam also used them against the Kurds in Iraq,
right.
So he did use them himself.
Oh, yeah, he was horrible. It's Al-Qaeda and the Al-Qaeda wannabes that I'm concerned about more than because I'm telling you, Al-Qaeda believes that the way to clear the way for eventual domination in the world and reestablishment of a worldwide Muslim caliphate is to cut the head off the snake, which is what KSM tried to do. KSM tried to decapitate us by knocking out our financial system, our military leaders, and our congressional leaders all in one swoop, right? So they're still dreaming of that, and they're still looking for some way to set off some catastrophic weapon that'll bring us to our knees.
Is it possible to defeat a group like ISIS, or they just keep replicating?
Well, you have to treat it like a virus, right? You have to kill the source and kill the vectors somehow. And I'm talking about in terms of viruses. We do a number of things that KSM thought was just brilliant on their part. I mean, we allow groups whose stated goal is to overthrow the United States and establish Sharia law to operate in our country under the cover of political correctness. One of the universities just started a fellowship where they could study Sharia law with the intention of making it more, acceptable. And in some places in Europe, they've established civil Sharia law courts to handle contract disputes and marriage stuff between Muslims. I think this sort of slow ratcheting up of Sharia law is much more insidiously dangerous than some catastrophic attack, because you know what happens when you poke your finger in the eye of the Americans. You get crabby old guys like me arming up and coming after you. Political correctness is a cloaking device that they use so that they can operate in our midst without being challenged.
Was the mastermind behind all this stuff, was it bin Laden? I mean, I hear all the KSM behind all this, and bin Laden isolated himself. Was he more of almost a symbol of us getting even rather than the threat?
He was their, for lack of a better term, their political and spiritual leader. Not that he was a scholar necessarily, But he had several attacks that he was interested in, and he knew how to bring people together. So he's like the CEO. You know, KSM, who was a savant when it comes to doing attacks, he wasn't even a member of Al-Qaeda when he did 9/11. He just did it because he agreed with their goal of destroying Americans. But Osama bin Laden had a number of attacks that he was planning that would have been equally devastating. For example, I'm the first American that talked to Nashiri, you know, the guy that did the Cole attacks. And one of the attacks that they were working on that got disrupted was Osama bin Laden had him go out and look for that tanker. I think I talk about it in my book. And they were going to use that tanker like an aircraft carrier to sink oil tankers in the Straits of Hormuz. That was Osama bin Laden's baby. You know, he wanted to cause major catastrophic environmental and economic destruction, really.
I love in that the I guess the Yemen pirates ended up hijacking the boat, and the Nashiri says, well, you can't trust them.
And he's Yemen himself. That's the thing that was so amusing about it. He goes, can't trust the Yemenis. You know, he was so stupid. I thought, you know, he had a cousin that when they were going to blow up the coal, fell down in a sewer and drowned in Asia. And I asked him, I said, does this guy get into paradise? And he goes, oh, yeah. No, he's on his way right now. And I thought, holy cow.
Did you guys work with the Pakistani intelligence, ISI, I think it's called, who in essence was harboring them near their West Point? Was that all a black hole to us?
You know, I can't talk about who they worked with, but I can tell you that as you would know from reading the paper, that within Pakistan there were some people who were supportive of the terrorists, and there were some people who were against the terrorists. Politically, I think what happened when George Bush said, you're either with us or you're against us, it scared some of the people who would have otherwise been against us into at least going through the motions.
As we get down to the end, you say in the book the CIA EIT's program success was its own worst enemy. What does that mean?
I mean, it stopped attacks, and those people who, when they were running scared, were dressing down the CIA for being too risk averse. Once they were, you know, once the attacks, especially that West Coast attack, didn't happen, they began to think it wasn't going to happen, and then they crawled back out from under the rocks and started berating the CIA and the men and women in the military who were in the law enforcement who were keeping them safe.
All right, we've had a very interesting conversation with Dr. James Mitchell. We thank him for his service, and again, from my perspective, I feel bad that the politicians at the end let you guys hang out to dry. You got to read the book, though. It's fascinating. You won't be able to put it down. Enhanced Interrogation Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. And a portion of the proceeds are going to the CIA Memorial Foundation, and that's at ciamemorialfoundation.org. You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks a lot, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.